That's one fine-looking barbecue pit. Why doesn't mine look like that? Ah! Ah!
Half-Life 2 Overcharged, a mod that for many brings along with it anger and unstoppable rage. A mod that is even more hated in the community than the infamous Half-Life 2 cinematic mod. So, why is this? Well, first off, the premise. It was to be an overhaul modification for Half-Life 2 in its episodes, with brand new gameplay, levels, and post-processing features. But it was also going to add Race X, new Combine units, and Zen aliens with new weapons. First of all, I personally have a problem with calling this an overhaul mod. This works with Half-Life 2 Update, and you could even argue that MM mod fits this term better. The best way I can describe this mod is like installing a bunch of weapons and enemy add-ons in Gmod, and then just placing them in Half-Life 2. In fact, it reminds me more of SMod than anything else, and there are similarities between the two even though they are different mods. And while yes, there is new post-processing features, you barely can notice this in the mod, and I don't really think anybody cares about that. Now, before we go on and talk about the mod, I want to talk about the developers first. The Overcharged team consists of 5 members: Mike Knopf, Breegy, Reaper, Sipless, and Dark Sias. And I want to focus on Breegy the most because he already made a mod that some of you may know. Overcharged was not Breezy's first ever rodeo with modding. In fact, he made a little known mod called Arctic Adventure. The mod is, I'm not gonna lie, it's terrible. Stolen assets, overpowered enemies, boring and sometimes broken levels, and a confusing storyline. The whole shebang. I could go over the entire mod here, but I don't feel like it's necessary, and this video is already as long as it is. But what you should know is weapons like the Ion Rifle, Combine Sniper Rifle, Gas Cannon, Gluon Gun, Extinguisher, and most importantly of all, the Barnacle Grapple, all came from here and were purposed for Overcharged. While the Extinguisher is memed to death for being a stupid addition to Overcharged and not having a purpose, and being an all-around useless weapon at least, it did have a purpose. Because you can in fact extinguish fires with it. The Barnacle Grapple, on the other hand, is a useless weapon. Even in his Arctic Adventure mod, it was badly implemented, and if Breezy had any respect for his mods, he would have never included this weapon. While yes, this weapon had its purposes in opposing force, it has no purpose in a game like Half-Life 2, which is a completely different animal. It goes to show, to me at least, that the developers, and above all Breezy, love adding unnecessary things to this mod. The Barnacle Grapple, after many memes and laughs, was taken out of the mod in embarrassment, while the Extinguisher for some reason is still included. If you have a decent rig, you can play the mod pretty well, and crashes are pretty rare and aren't game breaking if they do happen. But you will be staring at a loading screen for 2 minutes, no matter how good your rig is. Which, in Overcharged's defense, this happens to most Half-Life 2 mods no matter what you're playing. If you start off with the first chapter of Half-Life 2 and making your way through City 17, you'll realize something weird. Should these civilians already know who Gordon Freeman is?
Finest remaining urban center.
Gordon Freeman, and
I
about
thought so
time
much
too.
of city.
Why are there more citizens and metro cops added to the train station? Why is the Citadel replaced with a different model? From the start you can see that the developers add or replace things into the world that aren't really necessary or fun. Sure, the Citadel model might be more in line with different combined structures, or even the Citadel in Half-Life Episode 1, but honestly, to me, it's just rather unnecessary, and this model is of much lesser quality than the one in Half-Life 2. One thing that is unique about Overcharged is its code. Unlike different Half-Life 2 mods that include the episodes, they try to keep the mods separate for each game, and they try to run them on the individual games like Cinematic Mod does. But Overcharged just threw that entire idea out of the window and combined all 3 into one huge campaign. Basically, Overcharged is run on Half-Life 2 Episode 2, while the mod also includes Half-Life 2 and Episode 1. So the code is being based off of how Half-Life 2 Episode 2 works. This in turn also makes Half-Life 2 play this way, and which is why Half-Life 2 might have more problems than the episodic ones. But what is clear to me is that the developers were clumsy, and that the code could in fact be entangled with each other, while we don't really have Oh. Oh, what is this? This is an article on the ModDB page, where a developer of the mod that used to be on the team leaked the unorganized files and the code of Overcharged. And this was then sent around and laughed at by various people that knew a thing or two about coding. Well, yes, the code was entangled like spaghetti, and this was still quite an early build. It kind of foreshadows why the mod might have some issues for some. What also sparked my interest here is that they used Jania's weapon models, the FF2 remodels you see in Overcharged. Jania's weapon models are great, but come on, couldn't you just do something more unique than using someone else's remodels? And from what I've looked up, I don't even know if they have permission. Like, at least credit him and your mod. In fact, all weapons look like they're imported from somewhere. Their quality individually being quite different from each other. We have weapons like this that look amazing and fit the FF2 universe. And they sound like they are made for ASMR.
Lord have mercy, I'm about to bust.
And then you have weapons like this. How can you screw up this bad? This is just done on purpose, like come on. Here is a grenade launcher in Overcharged, a mod that released in 2022. And here is the grenade launcher in S-Mod, a mod that released in 2004. If they already imported high quality models for other guns, why not do it for this one? S-Mod, a mod that, mind you, is by now 20 years old, does a way better job in balancing its weapons. They at least made sure that everything was about the same quality. Take the flamethrower for example. A pretty cool addition if you ask me, right? Overcharged thought so too, but instead of being good or even better, it got worse. I'm not trying to say that all weapons are bad and overcharged. There are definitely weapons that I like. There are a bunch of unique weapons in this game, like the black hole generator. It creates a black hole, obviously, that sucks in props and enemies around it. It's really something unique, and something similar like this was in FF2 Entropy 02. It just adds something cool and interesting into the mod. Why can't more things be added like this? I won't go over every individual weapon because this video would go on for another 30 minutes, but I do feel obligated to point out how redundant some of these weapons are. There are 5 melee weapons, 5 submachine guns, 6 assault rifles, 3 sniper rifles if you exclude the crossbow, 3 laser shooters, and 4 throwable explosives. There is a reason why so many weapons were cut from FF2 beta, and this mod makes it more obvious why. If you already have weapons that serve the same purpose, why add more? But right now you're probably wondering, Tornado. Some of these weapons have applications like grenade launchers, scopes, and being able to switch between firing modes. And while you might be right, I just don't see myself using the fire mode mechanic that much. Well, yes, it is cool to switch to automatic with a shotgun. You just blast through zombies. This is then completely outdone when you pick up the XM1014, which auto-fires anyway. This sort of mechanic could have been interesting with pistols and early levels of the game. Imagine switching from semi-automatic to automatic with a 9mm pistol. This would have added something interesting and new to FF2. Again, something that an older mod did a long time ago. The scopes in reality are only useful in chapters with wide open areas, so their use is very limited. The scope mechanic is not that bad actually. You really can't do anything wrong with it. I mean, they'd really have to try with this one. Another thing that kind of bothers me is that they ported in different assets from either Counter-Strike 2, Half-Life, and FF2 Beta. I'm overall fine with using different assets of different games and even using entire gun models, but just copy and pasting these into your mod makes it seem incredibly lazy. With some of the CS2 weapons, you can actually attach a silencer, which has no use or purpose in Half-Life 2. This isn't exactly a Hitman game, mind you. They also just straight up ported in the Hive Hand from Half-Life, a game that came out in 1998. They also added in the wrench and knife from Opposing Force, which I don't care enough to go into any further. The developers also included a bunch of Half-Life 2 beta weapons, like the flare gun, MP5K, SMG-1, OICW, anti-material rifle, Tau cannon, emulator, handheld, warp cannon, and a trip mine. And I gotta say, I love all of these weapons, especially the OICW. But sadly enough, the developers got lazy again and basically just ported over the AMR, Tau cannon, emulator, and warp cannon from the cut Half-Life 2 beta content. Which, by the way, most of these models are older than 20 years old. Although I should point out that, unlike in the beta, the AMR actually has the ability to damage things like gunships and APCs, so this is actually something new and cool. Another thing that I seem to miss in this mod is goofy weapons. It would have been amazing to see a returning S-mod weapon like the prop cannon. The prop cannon is just really amazing, in my opinion. It's just one of the things I remember from S-mod the most. I love it. But to be fair, the developers were not looking for something like this to be implemented into the mod, so I can understand that. And before you say, Tornado, they didn't want to implement guns from S-mod, yes they did. There are various types of S-mod inspired guns in this mod. The mod, like S-mod, has a kicking mechanic, which isn't really that popular for most players. Why? Because my colleagues pointed this out before, that the kick damage is really high, that can actually instantly kill, let's say, a Metro Cop. But then again, you go into this menu and you simply change the kick damage. It's not that hard, and I don't see why it's a complication. I'll get into the menu later, but what you do need to know is that you can not only kick, you can also melee damage enemies with your weapons, which I barely use, to be honest, because you have the kick mechanic, but I think it's still a cool detail that every weapon can do this, so that's pretty cool. Now, to get to the menu, in my opinion, it's pretty f***ing well done. Compared to things like S-mod or even Cinematic mod, it's actually very accessible. The menu actually adds a lot of things you can change, like friendly fire, 3D body render, options to turn on or off the kick and melee swing, various types of gunplay options, effects and lightning settings, graphic settings. It's quite an impressive option menu actually, and I think it's on par with mod. While the menu is great, I have to mention that the graphic settings are sometimes, how should I put it, problematic. So be careful what options you turn on or off here. So now onto the short list of new enemies that they added into Overcharged. They added, 20. Yeah, they added quite the unique roster in my opinion too. They added 7 cut Half-Life 2 enemies. Some are fun to engage and have improved regarding their S-mod counterpart, like the bull squid now using similar projectiles like in Black Mesa. Some are broken and just not fun to play against, like the Hydra. This mod would have been better without it, to be honest. Something I really appreciate about this roster is that the devs had the balls to include the Half-Life opposing force enemies. Personally, I think the Shock Trooper and Gonome are two of the best enemies to fight against in this mod. Genome or Gonome, am I saying that right? It doesn't matter. And they also included 4 Half-Life enemies, that in my opinion are the lamest of the bunch. I just don't think they fit the environment that Half-Life 2 is placed in, and I found fighting them kind of boring. And honestly, they're mostly included in maps that already have a bunch of enemies, so they're more of a irritation than something fun. The thing I have to mention here is that most of the added enemies have incredibly bad AI. The Bull Squid and Houndai, for example, just stand still most of the time and barely move unless you're standing close to them. The Hydra is just incredibly broken, and it lacks a good hitbox, and its placement in the mod is so out of place. This thing was designed for sewers, not open canals. Most of the Zen creatures and Race X creatures are, to be fair, ports from Half-Life and Opposing Force, so their AI is rather unchanged. Like I said before, the Alien Grunt and the Alien Controller don't fit in a Half-Life 2 setting. It would have been cool if we had like a Zen level where these enemies were to be seen and that we could fight them, which would have been cool and interesting, but we don't have something like that in this mod. So they're just more of an annoyance and just something else to shoot at. But the Half-Life opposing force enemies are actually pretty good, so I'm glad they added them. But sadly enough, there are enemies in this mod which are just wasted potential. For instance, the Combine Guard is just lazily implemented. Originally, the Combine Guard was supposed to be an enemy boss type for Half-Life 2. Where the player would use the gravity gun to damage pieces of its armor by using explosives. And after enough damage was done to its armor, it would become disabled, although technically not dead. It ultimately was supposed to be a very challenging but rewarding boss fight. But Overcharged said, well, f*** that. Let's just give it a massive health pool and let the player shoot an entire magazine full of ammo until it goes down. Quite sad, really, because it had the potential to be really interesting in a boss fight like area. They also reintroduced the common assassin, which is just more annoying to fight against than fun. Most of these common assassins can be seen in tight areas with different enemy types also present, which adds a layer of difficulty that's not really fun or engaging. Now, Half-Life also had assassins, but these were in large areas with no different enemy types, which just made it more fun and engaging. Now, this could have been solved by adding an area or level into the game where the common assassins could be utilized in a fun and engaging way, but the developers just don't do that. That said, enemies like the pit drone are very well implemented, and maybe that's just because of my personal bias, because it's my favorite enemy from opposing force. The shock trooper was actually also enjoyable. I thought it was a pretty fun enemy to fight against. And you can pick up its weapon, which is actually surprisingly useful at times. But the most compelling was definitely the Gnome. This added something to Ravenholm that I always wanted. A big zombie that can throw projectiles from a distance while I'm engaging its smaller companions. Seeing it jump from rooftop to rooftop and eventually coming down to fight me was really entertaining and scary, with me being distracted by it and occasionally getting damaged by other types of zombies. The success of the Gnome in mods like Entropy 02, Raising the Bar Redux, and Overcharged should be a testament of how well opposing force has aged across the years and even decades. I kind of feel sad for saying this, but the iconic Cremator, basically the mascot for Half-Life 2 Beta, doesn't really appear that much in Overcharged. And to be brutally honest with you, the enemy was never that engaging to begin with. I mean, sure, it is well designed, and it's even loved by the developers back at Valve, but I can see why it didn't make the cut for Half-Life 2, and why it was eventually cut also for Half-Life Alyx. Debatably, all enemy types in this mod are flawed, and I could go over all of them, but I think this video is already way too long, so I'm not going to do that. These were just my handpicked favorite, and obviously the Gnome is just not flawed at all. It's perfect. I love you. Just maybe if the developers added more levels and areas into the game, these enemy types could be utilized in an interesting way. Oh, and this brings me to... The developers promised, and still promises, new maps and recreations of concepts and beta maps that are to be included in Overcharged, and some have been included, to some degree at least. The first one you find is in this tunnel that leads to an area that, if you've played Half-Life 2 for as long as I have, instantly recognize. It's the same tunnel that is found in the exact same level. This is just incredibly lazily done. No new area, nothing fun or interesting, just a copy and paste. What would be interesting here if there was a shelter for the refugee we saw on top of the bridge, with a ladder leading up to said bridge. Then climbing that ladder and finding the refugee dead with a manhack nearby. After destroying the manhack, you destroy more supply crates to find a cool new gun. This would not only add something to the original Half-Life 2, it would also add something more rewarding and a great way to tell the player that exploring offers new guns and interesting areas. Now, the mod does have new areas in Ravenholm which are actually good, like the dock that was removed from Ravenholm and can be seen in this E3 presentation. It was re-added in this mod. After fighting your way to Ravenholm, you enter the mines, and this is where you realize that the mines are way bigger than in Half-Life 2. There are different paths here, and a new vehicle, and a Gonark sack, because this was actually a cut section from Half-Life 2. Originally, in Half-Life 2, you would need to destroy the Gonark sack to continue the game, and move on to the next level. In Overcharged, it leads to a different section of Ravenholm, with new levels that we haven't seen before. If you climb up this ladder and make your way over to this window, you can climb through the window, open this door, and you reach a completely different level. In this level you almost immediately pick up an AR-2, and then encounter a bunch of Combine soldiers. In the same level, you can see Father Gregory attempting to enter a medical asylum. This is actually a reference to the cut Half-Life 2 spin-off, Return to Ravenholm, where Adrian Shepard would take a trip to the zombie-infested town and fight alongside Gregory. Most, if not all of the gameplay was to be set in a medical asylum, but that's a story for another video. Moving on, you can either choose to go back into the mines, exiting the same way you would in the original, or you can continue in the added level and enter a door that leads you to the next level, like in the original, just a little further. Honestly, these levels are pretty great, and it didn't deviate from the plot all too much and didn't ruin anything for me. In fact, I think it's actually very interesting to see Father Gregory entering the medical asylum. And this actually adds something to Half-Life 2 and its lore and the mystery behind Father Gregory. All in all, just a fun and interesting expansion to Ravenholm. It really sucks that there's no more alternate levels or alternate routes you can take after this chapter. If only developers added more things like this into the mod, it would be way more interesting. In fact, I think this is the best way to overall describe this mod, is promise big, deliver less. So, from everything I've stated here, do I personally dislike the mod? Well, no actually. Yeah, no, blasphemy, how can I say this, but allow me to explain myself. Even after all the reasons I've given why this mod has major problems, but liking or disliking something is not the same as being a good or bad product. We've all played games that on the surface are pretty bad or average, but still have a good time playing them nonetheless. After all, it's just a different way of replaying Half-Life 2 in a different way with added stuff. People tend to compare SMOD to Overcharged, constantly bringing up that SMOD is clearly better, and to be honest, all I can do is laugh. SMOD basically has the same things people hate Overcharged for. Broken AI, sometimes useless and game-breaking weapons, and outdated and sometimes even broken code that needs a standalone engine to support it. Save corrupt and crashes, you get my point. And you know, I still love SMOD, it's still my favorite way to replay Half-Life 2 in a different way. I think this mod could still pull a No Man's Sky if the devs actually put effort into fixing the mod and adding things they promised in the following years. The developers also had a strange obsession with launching the mod on Steam, even though it got bad reviews on launch, which seemed strange to me. If anything, I'd want to keep it away from Steam until you have a fixed and finished product. So, why did I make this video even after the joke died? Well, I want to show people what happens when you overpromise a mod and try to rush development, and you skip large parts of your playtesting so you can release a mod before the hype dies. And secondly, because one of my colleagues actually mentioned me in their video. What I should have said in retrospect is that I enjoyed the mod, not that I thought it was good. And honestly, I think the devs shouldn't have received all the hate they've gotten. They released a disappointing mod, they didn't commit a war crime for crying out loud. In conclusion, it's fine to enjoy something while recognizing that it has flaws, and to be able to give criticism without kicking someone when they're already down. In fact, Overcharged, SMod and Cinematic Mod are all very enjoyable mods, if you don't take them seriously. Yeah, I said it.